Staff Sergeant Claire Donovan stepped out of the Humvee into the heat shimmering over Davis-Monthan's flight line. The scent of JP-8 hung in the air, thick and familiar, carried on the dry wind. Rows of A-10C Thunderbolt 2s stretched across the apron, some with panels removed, others gleaming and ready for the next sortie. She felt the weight of eyes on her as she passed, crew chiefs pausing mid-task to take her in. One muttered, just loud enough, betting she wouldn't last a month in this squadron. Claire didn't break stride. The flight line roared with the whine of an auxiliary power unit spooling down. A load crew rolled a weapons trolley past, locking the wheel chocks in place. Toolkits sat open on the concrete. Mil-spec wrenches lined up in perfect order. Torque wrenches resting beside tagged parts awaiting install. Claire adjusted the brim of her patrol cap, reading the tail numbers as she walked. She had spent years on T6 Texan II trainers, where the pace was tight but predictable. Here, the work was heavier, the air hotter, and the expectations sharper. Her first assignment came fast. A Hog had just returned from a close air support training run, its fuselage streaked with dust from low-level passes. She jogged toward the designated spot, clipboard tucked under one arm. Captain Reynolds dropped from the ladder, helmet under one arm, and returned her salute without breaking eye contact with the crew behind her. His boots thudded away toward debrief before she could say a word. She climbed the ladder, easing into the cockpit space to begin the post-flight inspection. Claire's hands moved by habit, eyes scanning each system in sequence. Hydraulic lines under the wing root showed no signs of leaks. She leaned under the nose to check the GAU-8A rotary cannon bearings, fingertips brushing over the metal for heat and wear. The HUD alignment indicator read within spec, but she noted a minor offset to correct before the next flight. She logged each check, handwriting clean in the inspection sheet's narrow blocks. From across the ramp, Senior Master Sergeant Harlow stood with a clipboard, watching her every move. His sunglasses reflected the gleam of the Hog's canopy. Unreadable. Claire closed the last access panel, torqued the fastener, and handed the maintenance forms to the assistant crew chief without a word. The day's dust clung to her boots as she stepped back, giving the aircraft one last glance before moving on. The engines ticked quietly in the heat, the smell of metal and fuel settling into her clothes. She could still feel the weight of those watchful eyes, but her work was done right, and that was what counted. The A-10 taxied in slow, its nose wheel shimming slightly as it came to a stop. Claire caught the pilot's signal, a flat hand slicing the air, and her eyes went to the annunciator still lit in the cockpit. HYD2, press. The sortie had been cut short. Around her, crew chiefs exchanged glances, one murmuring that she must have missed something during the last inspection. She didn't respond. She climbed the ladder, listening as the pilot confirmed the system had dropped pressure just after takeoff. Claire stepped down and walked to the right side of the aircraft, flipping open the technical order binder on her cart. She traced the troubleshooting sequence with her finger, stopping at the page that detailed hydraulic system 2 diagnostics. With her gloves on, she removed the fasteners on the forward right gear fairing and swung the access panel open. JP-8 and hot metal mixed in the air as she connected a calibrated hydraulic pressure gauge to the service port, checking against the TO's range. The reading sagged well below spec. She followed the line visually, crouching low, tracing the routing past the actuator housing. A thin sheen of fluid clung to a return line near the connection fitting. She wiped it once, waited, and saw the slow bloom of new fluid. Leak confirmed. She called over an airman first class from the next spot down, his uniform already dusty, and handed him a wrench to secure the support bracket while she disconnected the line. The APU whine from a nearby jet filled the air, drowning out their short, clear exchanges. Rain came without warning, fat drops hammering the aluminum skin. Within minutes, it turned into a curtain, chasing most of the line crews toward the hangar. Claire pulled her Gore-Tex jacket from her pack, zipped it up, and kept working. The wet concrete reflected the aircraft's shape as she guided the new line into place, torquing the fittings to the exact value listed in the TO. Her hands stayed steady, her boots planted in pooling water. When the last fastener was in, she wiped the area clean and motioned for the pilot to restart the system. The canopy lowered, engines wound up, and the hydraulic indicator climbed smoothly back into the green. The pilot gave her a single, sharp nod from the cockpit before shutting down. Claire closed the panel, rechecked her tools, and signed off the form with her initials. From under the wing of another hog, Senior Master Sergeant Harlow watched, his clipboard tucked tight against his chest. He said nothing, but the slight shift of his stance told her he had seen every step. She rolled her cart back toward the tool crib, rain running down her sleeves, the noise of the flight line settling back to normal. The A-10 stood ready again, and no one was questioning her work now. The torque wrench was gone from her bench, the foam slot in the mil-spec tool case empty. Claire checked the shadow board twice, her eyes scanning for the familiar handle, but it was nowhere in sight. From across the hangar, a couple of maintainers watched her, their low voices carrying just enough to make the intent clear. She closed the case, signed out another calibrated wrench from the tool crib without comment, and rolled her cart toward the A-10 waiting for its scheduled gun gas purge. The GAU-8A loomed in the open bay, its rotary barrels dark with residue. She followed the technical order step by step, connecting the purge hose to the muzzle shroud and cycling the purge system until the meter read clear. The sharp tang of burned propellant hung in the air, mixing with the JP-8 drifting in from the flight line. She torqued the fasteners on the gun bay access panel to the precise spec, her gloves steady on the handle. The flight line phone rang, cutting through the hum of the hangar. An inbound jet was calling in with a gun safety flag issue. Claire dropped the rag in her hand, grabbed her headset, and stepped out into the heat. The A-10 rolled to a stop with the pilot's visor still down, the red streamer for the gun's safety flag dangling loose against the fuselage. She signaled for the pilot to remain seated, her hand flat and firm, then walked to the nose. Using the nose access panel latch, she swung it open and located the breech safety pin mount. The flag's retaining pin had been misaligned, leaving the gun technically unsafe for ground handling. She seated it correctly with a solid push, the locking ball snapping into place, then looped the streamer clear of the intake flow path. She closed the panel, gave the pilot a thumbs up, and stepped back. The engines spooled down to idle as she moved clear. Back in the hangar, the hidden torque wrench was sitting in plain view on her bench, as if it had never moved. She swapped it for the one from the crib, logged the return, and set it back in its slot. Without looking toward the watching crew, she rolled her cart into place and said evenly that missing tools delay sorties. Her tone was flat, almost casual, but it carried in the hangar. The next task waited, and she was already reaching for the next checklist. The sky over Davis-Monthan had turned the color of dull steel, the wind carrying a dry charge that hinted at what was coming. Lightning flickered far to the south, but the QRA board in the squadron ready room still showed green. Claire stepped onto the flight line with her tool cart and inspection binder, heading for A-10 number 102. The tasking was a simulated close air support run to a range where a JTAC had reported unusual smoke plumes. She knew the odds of launch were shrinking by the hour, but the checklist didn't care about forecasts. She started with the lightning targeting pod mounted on the right inboard pylon, running the built-in test sequence from the external control panel. The pod cycled through gimbal checks, lens covers sliding open and shut with a low whir. Data returned clean. She moved on to the missile rails, inspecting the LAU-117 launchers for secure mounting and wiring continuity. 2 inert AGM-65 Mavericks sat in place, their captive carry tags secured with safety pins. She logged the serial numbers and confirmed no corrosion at the umbilical connectors. The INS and GPS alignment was next. She connected the aircraft power and selected the align mode from the cockpit CDU, watching the latitude and longitude fields populate. The system began its timed alignment cycle, the timer ticking down in the corner of the display. While it worked, She moved under the nose, kneeling to inspect the landing gear struts for leaks or unusual wear. The air smelled of ozone and distant rain, but the airframe was dry. At the ammo bay, she unlocked the panel and swung it open, revealing the feed drum for the GAU-8A. She loaded 1,150 rounds of target practice ammunition, each with a distinctive blue tip, feeding them into the conveyor while checking for smooth rotation. The belt clicked into place, weight settling evenly in the drum. She verified the gun gas purge port was clear, then secured the bay. A staff sergeant from another crew paused on his way past, shaking his head. He said the weather was going to scrub everything and she might as well pack it in. Claire didn't look up from her torque wrench, tightening the panel fasteners to spec. She had heard the same tone before on other lines, and the weather wasn't her call to make. She climbed into the cockpit to check switch positions, setting master arm to safe, ensuring all circuit breakers were seated, and confirming the environmental controls were functional. The seat cushion was dry for now, but she pulled a poncho from her kit and draped it over the seat, tucking it under the harness straps to protect it from the incoming rain. The canopy rails glistened faintly as the first drops began to fall. Back on the ground, she closed the ladder, verified chocks and intake covers were in place, and logged the readiness status. The storm's edge was rolling in, the horizon already swallowed by gray. Engines or no engines, 102 would be ready if the scramble call came. The job was to keep it that way, until someone higher up said otherwise. The storm rolled over the base faster than the forecasters had promised, the horizon disappearing in a wall of gray. The first crack of lightning hit close enough to rattle the windows in the hangar. Claire was halfway through securing her tools when the flight line net came alive. An A-10 on the east apron had just called in a generator 2 failure. The pilot was holding on battery power and needed ground assist immediately. She grabbed her headset, zipped her Gore-Tex, and was moving before the rest of the message was through. Rain hit her like gravel as she pushed the cart out of the hangar, the wind trying to shove her sideways. She kept her head down and boots planted on the slick concrete. The Dash 60 power cart sat chained to the wall, its green paint faded but serviceable. She pulled the chocks, hooked the tow bar to her tug, and rolled it into the open. The storm was in full voice now, the sound of the wind nearly drowning out the growl of the cart's engine. She spotted the hog through sheets of rain, taxi lights glowing dim through the downpour. Its canopy was closed, the pilot's helmet moving as he scanned for her. She parked the Dash 60 parallel to the nose, set the brake, and jumped down. Her gloves were already wet when she grabbed the heavy power cable, swinging it up toward the receptacle on the left side of the fuselage. The connector locked with a satisfying twist. Static hissed in her ear as she keyed the radio. She gave the pilot a short, clear instruction to hold position while she brought external power online. His reply broke in and out, but she caught enough to confirm he was ready. She reached down to the cart's control panel, fingers feeling for the toggle in the blind wet, and switched the output on. The gauges steadied in the green. Over the net, she called for him to attempt the generator 2 reset. The rain was hammering the top of her hood, running in streams down the back of her jacket. She listened to the faint whine of the APU and the heavier tone of the main engines as the system cycled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cockpit voice crackled through, confirming the generator had come back online and was holding steady. She gave him the clear to disconnect, then moved fast to twist the cable free and stow it on the cart's hooks. Her boots splashed through puddles as she cleared his taxi path, the heat from the engines cutting through the cold air. The hog's lights swung past her as it began to roll toward the active, rain streaking across the canopy. She could see the pilot's gloved hand lift briefly from the throttle in acknowledgement before the jet disappeared into the mist toward the runway. She powered down the Dash 60, coiled the last of the cable, and latched the panel shut. The radio crackled again, this time with a voice she hadn't heard address her directly before. Senior Master Sergeant Harlow came over the net, calm but deliberate, noting that Staff Sergeant Donovan's quick action had kept 102 on mission status. Hearing her name and his voice carried more weight than the words themselves. She towed the cart back toward the hangar through the pounding rain, every step heavy with water but light with the knowledge that she had done her job and done it right. The storm still raged over the base, but the flight line felt steady under her boots. Somewhere beyond the curtain of weather, the hog was still in the fight, and that was all that mattered. The storm had burned itself out by late afternoon, leaving the base damp and quiet under a pale sky. The break room smelled of coffee and wet canvas, the radiator humming faintly in the corner. Claire sat at the far table, still in her flight line jacket, her Nomex gloves hanging from a hook by the door. Next to them, tucked into the corkboard, was the worn photo of her daughter with a gap-toothed smile, edges curled from years of handling. The door swung open and a crew chief from another bay walked in, shaking rain from his cap. He crossed to the coffee pot without looking her way, poured 2 cups, and set one in front of her. No words, just the soft clink of ceramic on the tabletop before he went back to his seat. It was a gesture small enough to pass without notice, but she caught the change in it. Captain Reynolds arrived a few minutes later, still in his flight suit, boots leaving faint marks on the tile. He glanced around the room, spotted her, and stepped closer. He told her that 102 had run clean all the way through the sortie, and that he appreciated her work in keeping it ready when the weather tried to say otherwise. She nodded once, keeping her eyes on the cup, letting the warmth seep into her hands before taking a sip. By the window, Senior Master Sergeant Harlow leaned against the counter, his clipboard for once nowhere in sight. When Reynolds left, Harlow crossed the room and told her he had 2 new airmen fresh from tech school who would be reporting in the morning. He wanted her to take them through their first line checks and make sure they learned the right way from the start. His tone left no space for doubt. Claire agreed without hesitation, already running through the steps she'd show them first. She could still hear the hiss of rain on the canopy from earlier, still feel the weight of the Dash 60 cable in her hands. Outside, the tarmac steamed in the returning sun, and somewhere a power cart rumbled to life. She finished the last of her coffee, set the cup in the rack, and went to hang her jacket next to the gloves. The photo on the board caught the light for a moment, before the door swung shut behind her. The hangar was quiet for a Saturday, the usual hum of the flight line replaced by the slow shuffle of weekend inventory. Claire was halfway through counting sealed hydraulic couplings when her phone buzzed against the metal shelf. Ops was on the line. An A-10 had diverted to the south training range after reporting control stiffness on final approach. The pilot was on the ground, safe, but the aircraft was grounded until maintenance arrived. She pulled a pen from behind her ear, wrote down the tail number, and told them she was en route. She stepped out to the motor pool, scanning for available bodies. 2 off-duty maintainers were loading a toolbox into the back of a truck for their own work. She waved them over, gave them the quick version, and got nods without hesitation. Together they rolled the main kit chest into the bed of a tan maintenance truck, stacking mil-spec tool cases and a hydraulic test set beside it. She threw in a pair of creepers, safety chocks, and a fresh spill kit before signing the vehicle out. The drive to the range was an hour through desert roads, the cab filled with the smell of dust and machine oil. She used the time to review the suspected fault. The pilot's symptoms pointed to a jammed actuator in the left inboard flap assembly. That meant working near the hydraulic lines with a live pressure and following every page of the technical order exactly. By the time they reached the access gate, the sun was high and the wind carried the dry heat of the flats. The A-10 sat off the main strip, canopy open, ladder deployed. The JTAC team on site had parked a Humvee nearby, their radios buzzing with range traffic. Claire walked straight to the pilot, exchanging quick greetings before asking about the fault sequence. He described the stiffness during landing and the failure of the flap to fully retract. She nodded, signaled her crew to start pulling tools, and had the pilot secure the master switch and bleed residual pressure from the system. Following the TO, she and 1 airman set chocks at all wheels and placed safety pins in the landing gear. She popped the actuator bay access panel, using a mirror to check the mounting bolts and linkage arm. The jam was visible at the pivot point, a fragment of composite wedged where it shouldn't be. She directed the second airman to position the hydraulic mule for controlled cycling while she prepared to remove the unit. The bolts came free one at a time, each tagged and placed in a magnetic tray. She kept her gloves clear of the pinch points as they lowered the actuator, setting it gently on a padded mat. The replacement unit came from the spares kit, already pressure tested and tagged for service. She inspected it again anyway, then guided it into position while the others held the linkage steady. The mounting bolts went back in with torque verified against the TO, safety wire twisted clean and tight. With the mule connected, she called for a slow cycle test. The flaps moved clean through their range without hesitation. She ran it twice more, checked for leaks, then had the pilot climb back in and run the system on internal power. The movement was smooth, pressures steady. She signed off the panel close, reinstalled the fasteners, and gave the all clear. The JTAC team had been watching from their Humvee. One of them keyed his radio, sending a quick thanks over the range net for keeping the bird in the fight. Claire lifted a hand in acknowledgement but didn't break stride. She gathered the team, stowed the tools, and secured the truck bed. The pilot taxied out a few minutes later, wingtip disappearing into the shimmer at the far end of the strip before lifting back into the hot air. Claire climbed into the truck, wiped the grit from her hands, and glanced once toward the empty runway. She didn't need a debrief or applause. The job was done. The aircraft was flying, and the crew was heading home. She turned the key. The engine caught, and they rolled back toward base with the desert stretching quiet on all sides. A month passed without any change to Claire's routine. She still arrived before the sun broke the horizon, still pulled her tool cart across the concrete without looking for anyone's eyes to meet hers. The squadron was quieter now in tone if not in tempo. The edge of doubt around her gone, but never replaced by ceremony. 2 new airmen had been added to her charge. She moved them through tasks with patience, never raising her voice, letting the work set the pace. They learned to follow her hand signals over the engine noise, to double-check every panel latch before stepping down. The evening shift brought a different kind of quiet. The desert air cooled. The tarmac washed in the gold light of a low sun. Claire stood on the maintenance stand alongside the left wing of an A-10, tightening the last fasteners on an avionics bay access panel. The aluminum skin reflected the sky, a thin sheen of dust clinging to its surface. She wiped her gloves across it once, more out of habit than necessity, then shouldered her tool pouch and started down the ladder. The clank of her boots on each rung matched the rhythm of her day. At the bottom, she checked her lockout tags and signed off the work in the maintenance log. A few steps away, a crew chief gave her a brief nod while running his own checks. She crossed the tarmac toward the tool crib, the wind carrying the deep rumble of another aircraft spooling up for departure. Jet wash curled dust across the concrete, flicking at the hem of her flight line jacket. The sun was almost at the horizon, the sky split between orange and deepening blue. One of the young airmen fell into step beside her. He had been quiet all week, watching her work, following her instructions without question. Now he asked how she stayed steady when things went wrong, how she kept her voice even when pressure rose. She glanced at him, not breaking stride, and told him the jet deserved it. Nothing more. No long explanation. Just the plain truth as she saw it. He thought for a moment, then nodded. They reached the tool crib, and she began returning her gear piece by piece, inspecting each before sliding it into its assigned slot. Her gloves went on the same hook as always, near the door, where they would be ready at first light. Outside, the departing A-10 rolled to the runway threshold, afterburner glow faint in the fading light. She could feel the vibration through the concrete even from here, a low thrum under her boots. The airman beside her paused, eyes lifting toward the sky as the jet lifted clear of the ground. A few heartbeats later, from somewhere beyond the base perimeter, came the unmistakable winding roar of a GAU-8A letting loose in a range sortie. The sound rolled in, like distant thunder, deep and steady, then faded back into the open desert air. Claire let the corner of her mouth lift, just slightly, before turning to finish her close-out checks. Tomorrow would start the same way, and that was exactly how she liked it.